Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Camille Vasca, and welcome to our Sunday Supper, which is a regular online gathering to discuss important issues facing our state today, started by this man, my husband, Mike Vasca, who's running for Attorney General in our state. Today, we'll be talking about how our state should move forward to combat COVID-19, which is certainly one of the most significant challenges we've ever faced. We'll be joined by two outstanding leaders with unique perspectives on this issue. We did have a third guest, Franz Hong, but unfortunately he had an urgent matter, and we certainly wish him and his family well. So now I'd like to welcome State Senator Ann Rivers from Clark County. She's a member of the Senate Republican Caucus Leadership Team, and she'll talk about the Republican proposal to begin reopening parts of our state economy, while of course maintaining appropriate social distancing. So let's make sure Ann is with us. Hi, Ann.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
Can you hear me?
Thank you. And then we also have Doug Ralston from Snohomish County. Doug will join us and talk about how he's using his experience as captain of a nuclear aircraft carrier and successful entrepreneur to help secure COVID-19 test kits from overseas for our state. Hi, Doug.
Hello.
Doug?
Oh, there he is.
Hi, good
There
to
he
see you.
is.
Hi, Camille.
Excellent.
Hi, Mike.
Great. Thank you both for joining us today. And now my favorite part, where I get to hand over the conversation to Mike.
Great job, Camille. Grant is waiting in the wings, checking questions. So I'll give a little bit of an opening here, Ann and Doug, and thank you for joining us. Franz Hong had one of his daughters fell ill. She's fine, but it was a bit of a family scramble. So he asked if he could come back another day. So there may be some good news on the pandemic front. Washington is more than 3 weeks past the peak of COVID-19 cases. The rate of hospitalizations has declined for several weeks, and the transmission rate in King County is now at or near the level where the virus would continue to decline. So we're ready to reopen and resume our lives, right? Well, not so fast. Two respected models, one out of the University of Washington and the other out of Bellevue, suggest it would be premature to reopen our economy before the end of May. Now, we can and should debate what these mean, but we do need to be mindful of the science and the data. It is clear that we are weeks away from reopening our entire economy in Washington. So how do we balance protecting the health of the ones we love without further harm to our economy? And that's what we'll be talking about today with Senator Ann Rivers, who you've met from Clark County. And we'll also be discussing the Republican legislators' approach to safely restarting our economy. And since testing is so key to reopening, we'll hear from Doug Ralston, a small business owner and former Navy captain, as he works as a private citizen to secure testing kits from Korea. Now, you might wonder why we're having this discussion on an event for an attorney general candidate. Well, in other states, attorneys general are working with the help of all other folks in their office in an all hands on deck approach to addressing issues arising from the crisis. To help small businesses survive COVID-19, one attorney general is providing funding from consumer recoveries, loans, and even pro bono help to small businesses. Another is working with small business to combat cybercrime and scams. But in Washington state, our attorney general continues to make it more difficult for some to stay in business by threatening lawsuits over legal violations that are the direct result of things beyond their control, the pandemic. And he continues to divert millions of dollars from groups serving at-risk communities to pay for his partisan lawsuits against the federal government. He's now filed more than 55 of those. That money should be used to help people here in the Evergreen State in our time of crisis. And there are a whole host of other legal issues that we're now dealing with in response to the pandemic. I was on the Jason Ranch show last week, and he asked me to discuss the legality of Governor Inslee's emergency orders and of the protests in Olympia. One of the candidates for governor, Josh Freed, filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging the stay-at-home order, at least to the extent that it limits freedom of religion. The governor has ordered the early release of prisoners, nearly 1,000 from state jails. In Franklin County, commissioners voted and the Snohomish County Sheriff declared that they would not enforce the governor's stay-at-home order. The impact of COVID-19 will create one of the most difficult and complex legal environments for our state, perhaps ever, and it will last for years. I have the deep legal and political experience that will be needed to tackle these challenges as your next Attorney General. No other challenger in this race has significant legal experience. The COVID-19 crisis is not a time for learning on the job. I have decades of experience in one of the Northwest's most respected law firms, and I've represented some of the Northwest's leading companies in helping to solve big challenges for them. I have extensive experience dealing with the state's Department of Health on hospital expansion and access to health care. I've served on the board of a Chamber of Commerce, and I led the business community on efforts to make things happen in our community on transportation and other issues. And until recently, I chaired a statewide political organization that takes a big tent approach to problem solving. I have both the legal and political experience, decades of it, to take on the legal challenges that will be facing our state and to help find that all-important balance between protecting our health and protecting our livelihoods. But of course, I will need your help to get elected so I can help you and the rest of the state with these challenges. If you haven't done so already, please go to my website and make a contribution. That's mikevasca.com. Okay, end of my shameless plug for my campaign. Let's get on to our discussion with Senator Ann Rivers. Ann, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Excellent. So first off, Ann, I know that COVID-19 is affecting different communities in different ways, and even within those communities, affecting different people in different ways. Can you just tell us how is COVID-19 affecting you down in Southwest Washington?
So we, like everyone else, are following the governor's stay-at-home order, and but I'll tell you that what I'm seeing now are people begin to treat it with less care, and I think part of the reason for that, Mike, is that people are beginning to question the some of the demands. For example, we were all really excited when this pact occurred with California and Oregon, because Oregon never shut down its construction industry. They never closed down their golf courses. They didn't shut down online automobile sales. And so they took an approach of what can really work. And it's interesting to note that neither state has as high a rate of both incidence of the disease, of the illness, or of death as a result of COVID as we do. So what are they doing differently that we could learn from? And so there's a growing frustration because some of the things don't seem to make much sense. And when things don't make sense, people choose to disregard them. That is just human nature. Now, I'm not going to put a knock on the governor because he was at the helm at a time of extraordinary unknown. And so he had to take steps to try and address all of whatever could be a problem. But we're 2 months into it now, and people are growing frustrated because they don't see, there's no message of hope. They don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And really, that's what spurred the legislative leaders, Senator Mark Schessler and Representative J.T. Wilcox, to say, look, we need a plan because we need to provide the light at the end of the tunnel for employers, our economic drivers of this state, and for the employees who want to be at work. a sad outcome is that we've seen a spike in domestic violence, child abuse, and suicide. So we need that return to something that looks like normalcy. I don't think we're going to get there for some time, but I do think that there are some things that we can do to relieve the pressure. So that's
Senator,
how the business plan came about.
thank you, Senator Rivers. And I want to ask you more questions about the plan in just 1 second, but it's my understanding that Republicans, at least the leadership, or at least at a minimum, the leadership, have been working with Governor Inslee on a number of issues. And certainly during the height of the crisis, we're working very hard on a bipartisan basis, or an attempted bipartisan basis. Can you talk about that a little bit before we talk about the plan and how it came about?
So candidly, Mike, that's not been the Senate Republican experience. We've written no less than 13 letters with suggestions to the governor of things that could be done to lessen the burden on the people, to make our thoughts known. The prisoner release, we had grave concerns with that. And sure enough, a prisoner was released who's positive for COVID-19. Who knows how many people he had come into contact with. He was quarantined for only 4 days prior to his release. We felt that he should have been quarantined for 2 weeks, and the prisoners were released after our peak. So it seemed more like the using a crisis to meet an ideological concern. I know that Representative Wilcox felt like he was working well with the governor, though the reality is that the governor ignored all of our pleas to reopen construction. It is important to note that construction for state jobs, if you were a union worker, you got to go to work. But if you worked for a private home construction, then you were not allowed to go to work. And this just didn't make any sense. One project could be right next to the other, and somehow they weren't allowed. One group was allowed to go to work and the other was not allowed. So that didn't make sense. And truly, that was part of the reason why we felt we had to take this step with this plan, because we needed to find a way to get the governor to listen to us. That's been the Senate Republican situation. I can't speak for the House Republicans, but I was certainly glad that they agreed to work with us on a plan that would move the state forward.
And Senator Rivers, is this plan a joint plan of the Senate and the House Republicans?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
We worked together to put it together under the direction of our leaders.
Okay. And can you, I know you've been doing this around the state, so you probably have it down pretty cold, but can you just give us at a high level what are the key elements of the plan and what we can look for maybe around the corner in terms of how this rolls out?
So the key elements of the plan are basically get rid of the idea of essential and non-essential. Allow each sector to come up with its sector-specific plan, how they think they can operate safely for their workers, safely for their customers. You know, the reality is that it's not a good business model to harm either your employees or your customers. If you harm your customers, you're not going to have customers. You won't get to stay in business. But the reality is that the state enjoys $23 million a day in the construction industry from residential construction. That's just wages. It doesn't include B&O taxes. It doesn't include sales taxes that are contributed to our economy. We are going to have one heck of a hole that we need to fill. So this plan allows each sector to develop an industry-specific plan how they can safely operate. Then the plan can be perused by Department of Health, the local Department of Health, by others, and make sure that it's something that's doable. And there's a piece in there that there's an on-site COVID person. Most most businesses have a safety manager. So the bottom line is that we can see auto dealers. So auto sales, a huge, huge portion of our economic engine of our state, no pun intended. And yet there's no online sales involved. There's very little human interaction at all. And if the car can be disinfected, put on a trailer and delivered to someone's home, why wouldn't you allow that activity to occur? So these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. And finally, with the restaurant industry, my son was a manager at a pub in Battleground, and he told me that his hours had been cut 2 weeks prior to the governor's stay-at-home order. Why? Because people were making a choice. The consumer will make a choice to protect themselves. And sadly, that pub has now announced that it will never reopen because food establishments operate on a razor thin margin. The ones who have been able to succeed have had the curbside pickup. But it's time for us to listen. They've put together a very comprehensive plan that includes social distancing and additional sterilization activities and limiting numbers of patrons at tables and that kind of thing. So I think business knows how to care for itself. I think with the plan that they put together and government oversight to make sure they stick with the plan, then we all win. You know, it's no secret that that we're going to be in the hurt locker. And already we've been receiving the emails about don't cut my essential service. But the reality is that unless we're able to get these businesses opened back up, Mike, we are going to see cuts to some of the most vulnerable in our state. And that's a frightening prospect to me because we spent so much time on K through 12 education on trying to decrease the waiting list for the disabled folks in our state, and also in lowering college tuition. But we did that based on B&O tax collection from the business community. So it would be sad for me to see all of that good work erased if we can't figure out a way to have businesses open safely.
So Senator Rivers, I think part of the plan, at least as I read it, calls for some B&O and maybe some other tax relief for business. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because obviously right now, everyone is suffering, but especially small businesses suffering since they tend to have less in the way of reserves, and they're not often as spread out geographically. So they're often concentrated in one place in Washington in many cases. What do you have in mind for that tax relief?
You are spot on. So some businesses pay their B&O taxes monthly. Some businesses pay their B&O taxes quarterly. It just depends on the way the business is set up and their margins and so forth. But what happened was there was a little time period when when COVID hit that businesses will tend to use the profits from this month to pay last month's B&O. So to be able to offer them some relief, because as you rightly point out, they don't have a $3 billion reserve like the state does. So it's a little bit like getting blood from a turnip. If we can offer them some release or some relief and say, look, we're going to spread it out. You can pay a little bit more over an extended period of time, then that would be good. But here's another thing to consider. If you opened your doors January 1st of 2020, and this is the case, this is where this came from. One of my businesses in Camas had 30 employees. They opened their doors the 1st of 20. They don't have a track record. Well, the federal loans demanded that you provide the data from the prior year. So here they were operating for 3 months, supplying 30 people with jobs, And but they have, so there is no aid for them. Their only option is to shut down. There's not a huge number of those in our state, but if we can lend them a hand to continue the job generation, then I think that we are money ahead to do that, because every job that's provided is one less hit to our unemployment system as it exists today.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of relief that attorneys general in other states are providing. Obviously, there are small business loans at the federal level, but there are these businesses that fall through the cracks. You know, a one size fits all approach doesn't fit everyone. And so that's, I really applaud you for the innovative work you and your colleagues in the legislature have done in crafting something that helps to, give support to those that maybe fall through the cracks of the federal program. I wanted to ask you about something that I didn't see in the plan, but maybe I missed it. California's governor has admitted that it may be appropriate to open some parts of that admittedly very large state earlier than others, because different parts of the state are experiencing different rates of infection or different rates of decline in infection. Is that an approach we should be considering here, given that places like King County have more density and maybe have more issues with disease transmission than, say, I think there's still one county in our state that hasn't had a single case yet. Is that something you talked about? And
right, we talked about that a lot, and having a different, a more individualized approach just seems to make sense. I mean, if you're up in Wairika, California, that's way different. I would submit to you that if you're up in the Okanagan, very, very different than if you're in King County. And I think a plan that respects that and also puts faith in the local leaders and their local health departments, that they, as the boots on the ground, have a very clear understanding of what's happening in their region, their area. I think that they all have access to the data for their counties. And the reality is that sound leadership is derived, and leadership decisions are derived from sound data, not data that was created 2 months ago in a faulty model. We are refining our models all the time. I'm very interested in the models that are coming out of Santa Clara, because that says that it's a lot more widespread. And, I've spoken with people who say, I'm certain I've had this, but until we get the antibody test, we won't know for sure. But there's another thing that I want to share with you, which is really, people don't want to think as healthcare as business. But the fact of the matter is that when our governor determined what procedures were essential and what procedures were non-essential, he created a growing healthcare crisis, because now we're seeing chronic diseases turn into acute, right? So, for example, one of my constituents has a rapidly growing prostate cancer. And he was told that it's not essential. I don't know who decided what procedures were essential or not. I was not privileged to that. But I will tell you this: we have hospitals in our state who are very near filing for bankruptcy. And we have to respect that they are businesses, and they are businesses that actually their stock in trade is health safety. We have to put confidence back in them, because if we do get a resurgence in the fall and many of our small hospitals have gone out of business, then where are people going to go? And that is a very, no one's looking down the road that far. And that again is another reason why we did the plan. It's just really to finally say, come on, we have to be practical here. We have to be reasonable. And as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of the frustration and the people now thumbing their nose at all of the orders is because they feel like it's not reasonable that they should be denied a healthcare procedure that they need right now to prevent a bigger problem down the road. And I think, Mike, you and I would also agree that that's not reasonable. So I think that as we move forward, by releasing this plan and by going around the state and talking about it, we're creating some pressure on the governor to say, let's have a real discussion about what's really happening and why it's happening. Let's look for ways to alleviate the pressure.
I actually have worked for several of the largest hospitals in Washington State. I've done legal work for them, and I can tell you the hospital business is a business and the margins are very thin. So it doesn't really take that much to upset the apple cart, especially on some of the smaller hospitals. So good to bring that to our attention. As we wrap up here, Senator Rivers, I wanted to see if you had any observations about the role of our current Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, in handling this crisis.
Well, I have to tell you that I'm really disappointed that this time when we all need to band together and get through and recognize we're in a network. We are, everything is dependent and everyone is dependent on everyone else. So now is not the time to play politics. And my heart aches every time I see a brand new lawsuit against the federal government for this, that, or the other thing that doesn't help the people here. The people here need to be helped. We don't need to be blowing our money, which our resources, Mike, are going to be very scarce for maybe the next 2 or 3 years because of this. We don't need to be blowing them on lawsuits that aren't going to make a difference to the people of this state. So let's spend our money where it can make the most difference. Let's give a message of hope to the people. Let's provide sound thinking about a path forward that helps us to remain as intact as possible. And I guess it's just been a huge disappointment. I'd love to see our governor sue China, for heaven's sakes, where this all started. And one more thought for you. I think if we don't look at the lessons that have been derived from our experience with COVID, we are only doomed to have them repeat. We were woefully underprepared as a state. And I have firsthand knowledge because I had the bill I was the prime sponsor of the bill that would have fully funded our foundational public health. And it was gutted. It was absolutely gutted. And so we can point fingers at the feds or whoever else. The bottom line is, when it gets to the end of the day, we are responsible for taking care of ourselves and the people we represent, and we didn't do that. And now and it's sad to me to see our Attorney General pointing fingers everywhere else and spending money suing that we're going to need for more important things. That to me is not leadership. We need leadership. And I feel confident that you're going to be the one who will provide that for us, Mike.
Well, thank you, Senator Rivers. That's certainly my platform, leadership over partisanship. And that's what I've been doing for 30 years in my civic life, in my political life, in my legal practice. And I really want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for all the work you and your Republican colleagues in the legislature have done with this plan for moving forward. It's very, very thoughtful. It's very simple, which is really a plus in politics. And also, I think you had to show a little bit of bravery in putting it out there, because there is an understandable tendency for people to rally around a leader during a crisis. And we all get that. But this is an unusual crisis in that it could last for 18 months, potentially, until there's a vaccine that is proven to work and also is widely distributed. So it's a different kind of crisis. And it's really going to take both sides of the political aisle to work together to try to, make our state whole as much as we can, and especially help the people that are really being crushed by the lack of economic opportunity. So I really want to thank you for coming. Is there any last word you want to give to our viewers here before you sign off?
I'm just grateful. I'm being received so warmly all over the state with this message of hope and of recovery that I know I'm just fueled by I'm fueled by the courage of my convictions. And I want you to know that I'm trusting in you to do the right thing. I believe that you will always do the right thing. And that makes it easy for me to support you. So thanks a million for having me on.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Rivers. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon or evening, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Our next guest is Doug Rollstone. But before we get to Doug, I hope you're still there. We did get a question. Actually, we got several questions that are very similar to the one I'm going to read and give a little bit of an answer to. I don't know, we probably got a half dozen questions that were more or less on this theme of this question from Ann in Clark County. And she says that she wants to know about the constitutional issues that are involved in the pandemic orders. Should the Supreme Court eventually identify where the borders lie? This may not be the last time this occurs, and it seems that huge questions surround some of the orders. The governor of New Jersey famously said that concerns about the Bill of Rights were above his pay grade, and that is understandable. But how do we get some clarity from the Supreme Court, and when? Well, really great question. I've spent quite a bit of time looking at the statute and the very limited authority by our Supreme Court on it. I think the first thing I'll say is it is a statute. It's not part of the state constitution. The state constitution does not give our governor any emergency powers. It is by statute, which of course comes through the legislature. And so it can be changed by the legislature. And one of my recommendations has been, when we regain our footing, to look hard at that statute and think about how it needs to be revised to deal with this kind of a health emergency. The statute was passed. I actually talked to Governor Evans about this. It was passed when he was governor, and it was a time of riots, mostly anti-Vietnam riots in Seattle, but other kinds of riots. And if you read the statute, it talks about the kinds of things you might see in a riot, like Molotov cocktails, which are a form of a bomb. So it really wasn't designed for this crisis. It is a statute, which means all of our constitutional rights are above the statute, if you will. But our Supreme Court, in other contexts, in particular during the eruption of Mount St. Helens, has said that the governor has very wide latitude in exercising his, or in that case, it was Governor Dixie Lee Ray, authority in interpreting the statute. That makes sense in a crisis. Obviously, you want our government to have broad authority in a crisis. I think the question here is, what is the crisis? How long does it last? Can it last in perpetuity? And I think those are the questions, or for a long time, those are the questions that our Supreme Court is going to be asked. There's already a lawsuit that's been filed by a gubernatorial candidate in federal court to challenge those aspects of the order that prevent people from attending church service and other religious rights. So, my plug for you on that is let's push back against those parts of the stay-at-home order that we think are unconstitutional. Let's do it in a legal way. Let's go through the front door, as I like to say. If you're going to protest, which I'm not recommending, but if you are, get a permit. If the permit is denied, go to court. But let's not be the party that breaks the rule of law. Let's be the party of the rule of law, even if we don't always like the laws that we're having to follow. Okay, so that answers a bunch of questions that came in. Doug, let's move on to you. Doug, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. It was
Okay.
great to hear from Senator Rivers. Very interesting.
Yes. So Doug and I go way back. We're old friends. And Doug gets embarrassed when I remind people of this, but he was the captain of a nuclear aircraft carrier, the John C. Stennis, for a number of years before he became an entrepreneur in Snohomish County. And he's been involved in more civic and entrepreneurial activities up there than I can count. But I happened to talk to him last week, and he told me that he is working very hard to procure test kits, COVID-19 test kits from South Korea, because apparently they have some to sell and we need them badly. And of course, widespread testing is one of those things we need to put in place in order to fully reopen our economy. But so far, our state has really struggled to roll out that widespread testing. So Doug, can you tell us what you're doing as a citizen to help solve that problem?
Sure, Mike. I was approached, 10 days or so ago about a friend who said her son was in South Korea, and he's a lawyer like yourself, former general counsel for the Import-Export Bank. And he was working with 6 South Korean companies that had COVID-19 test kits to market, and they're trying to go through just all the bureaucratic rigmarole to try to get them to the United States. Now, what South Korea did when they had their crisis is they didn't lock down the country. The first thing the president did is got the 20 top pharmaceutical companies in the country together and said, develop test kits. We know we're going to need testing. And so they sent all these companies out to do that. And what South Korea has done to get their numbers down is they have done extensive testing, extensive tracing, and this contact tracing is, they do it by cell phone. We'd have privacy issues that would probably go up to the Attorney General's office about if the governor wanted to trace everybody's cell phone. But in South Korea, they were able to do that. And so they were able to rapidly identify people, trace them, and tamp this thing down. So they've had only less than 11,000 confirmed tests positive in the country, and now only 242 deaths. So they've done extremely well with that process. But in the meantime, all their companies ramped up very rapidly, and South Korea technologically is very advanced. And so there's many companies that are over there making these test kits. South Korea, much like our country and other countries, put restrictions on exports. So for instance, they currently still have a restriction on exporting PPE. They're building up their national stockpile, but test kits, they have an excess. There's one company that's making 400,000 test kits a day. And so there's tens of millions of test kits available. We're working to get them approved with emergency authorization orders by the FDA. Three of the companies we are dealing with have that approval now. And so we're just working on all the different forms and the procedures and everything you have to go through with the state and the federal government in order to actually bring them in legally and, expeditiously, because the sooner we can get, testing available everywhere, so that not only are we testing the most vulnerable people and the people that have symptoms and whatnot, but we can test people in general so that they can go back to work. That's what we need. And then follow that up with tracing. And I kind of think on tracing, everybody ought to keep a diary so you know where you've been the last 14 days. And so if you top positive, it's easy to trace where you've been. But I don't know if people will keep diaries. South Korea worked very well because they were more than willing to have their cell phones used to track, and they were more than willing to wear masks, and they wore them all the time. And that has knocked things down there very rapidly. And so that's why they have excess materials to sell to other countries.
So do you have a guesstimate as to when you're going to be able to declare success, that you will have procured those test kits? And if so, when will they come?
We think we're going to have gone through all the business things that we need to do by this next week. We've got contract lawyers in DC, and we've got lawyers in Korea. We're now getting agreements signed with each of these companies so that we can represent them. And we're filing with the Defense Logistics Agency and the state emergency management people that there's certain forms you have to fill out and get in and whatnot. We had to start a bank account and all kinds of things, but we think that by the end of this week, we'll be fairly open for business, and we'll just see. It appears that there'll be a large demand throughout the country, and we're just anxious to get them over here so that we can get this thing under control and get the country back on track.
Well, Doug, yet another impressive effort by you to make a difference in our community. I've seen you do it so many times, and it really does show how so many of us in the state are pulling together to find ways we can help solve the problem, whether it's buying groceries for a neighbor that can't go out because of concerns about exposure, or things like Doug is doing up in Snohomish County. Doug, I wanted to ask you one other question, which we didn't prepare for, so I hope I don't put you on the spot, but too much. But one of the people I work with went to the Naval Academy and told me that it was drilled into the plebes and other students that they should, in their service, they should always do the right thing, no matter the consequences. And I haven't asked you about the captain of the Theodore Roosevelt, the nuclear aircraft carrier that's very similar to the one where you were the captain. And as you know, he appealed to his superiors to allow the ship to come to shore because COVID-19 was beginning to spread, and he was worried that some of the sailors might die needlessly. And then the short version is he was fired for it. I haven't had a chance to ask you about that, but as the former captain of a ship very similar, what's your impression of what he did and the consequences? Well,
It's hard to give a real impression if you don't have all the information. I can tell you a couple of things. Number one, when you're captain of a ship like that and you have a major emergency, there's a reporting system called the OPREP 3 system, which you would send out this message and it would go all the way up to the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I'm sure that he did that, but that hasn't been reported. And it appears to me that what happened is if he went through that system and then there wasn't sufficient response, that then he went through the secondary one, which was to send this letter. It went to his 3 superiors in the chain of command and 7 other Navy captains, which I suspect were all commanding officers of other carriers. And somehow it got leaked to the press. He didn't send it to the press. So I think they did an investigation, and what I've heard just yesterday is he's going to be reinstated as the captain. So this is unprecedented in military terms, where you're relieved by a higher up, in this case, the acting Secretary of the Navy, and then get reinstated. So I think that probably he did what was best for the crew and best for the Navy. And when you're in those kind of leadership positions, you have to do the right thing, and at your own peril in some cases, but that's what I think that he did. So I'm interested to hear the whole story, not just the rest of the story, but the whole story when it comes out. And I think what it's going to show is that he was a frustrated leader that maybe wasn't as supported by the chain of command as he should have been. And he did get the answers he needed. The ship got in, and the crew has been taken care of. So if I were in his position and I had been relieved, I would feel fine having done that, knowing that the crew was taken care of.
Well, it's one thing in my 30 years of working on big complex issues and getting to know some of the great leaders in our state and people like Doug. You hear this theme over and over again, that to be an effective leader, you really have to focus on doing the right thing, whatever the consequences. I call it, in this context, leadership over partisanship. And that's been my brand for 30 years, not without some consequences for me personally, but But I've always come out the other side believing very, very much that that is the right way to lead. That's the right way to to solve problems. And I believe that captain probably saved some lives because of what he did. And it may be a fairy tale ending because, as Doug said, it's unprecedented that someone who's been fired from the command like that gets reinstated. But we'll stay tuned on that. Well, thank you, Doug, for joining us.
Can I say one other thing?
Oh, sure.
Okay, I just wanted to say to everybody that's listening to this is that, you know, I have known you for a long time, and I have great respect for you. And you didn't mention, but I've run for political office a couple of times, and I know the consequences and the difficulties and the challenge to families, Camille and your sons, that running for office like this, as important as it is, it's a major decision to make, and something that I want to thank you for personally. I think we need good people like you running for office all the time, and it's great to have you step up and you know, even in this time of great peril in the state and our country, and that's what we need. We need good people that will step up and take command. And that's what I look forward to happening in November. And so you got my vote.
Well, thank you, Doug. That was unsolicited. I probably should have asked you. I'm still getting into the saddle of being, running for office. But I really, really appreciate that, Doug. And you have run very successful campaigns. You actually, I believe, were appointed to the state legislature for a brief time. So I probably should have called you by your honorary title.
That's
but
all right.
Anyway, you can see there's a lot of mutual affection here. Okay, Doug, any other last words?
Nope. Just
Okay.
Best to you and your family, and stay safe.
Yes, give my best to Bonnie and your two boys, and I hope the restaurant renovation is coming along, and you'll be ready to open when the state opens.
We hope so.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Josh Amato, who's behind the camera here, and Camille, of course, who you saw earlier, and my son Grant, who's off to the side here monitoring the feed for us. We did have some questions come in, as I mentioned before the event. If you have questions on this topic, please continue to send them, because this is not the last time we're going to talk about next steps of COVID-19. But we wanted to get the conversation going, and we know it'll be something that we'll be hotly debating for many weeks, if not many months. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget to visit my website, mikevasca.com, and to help pay for shows like this and other campaign activities, please consider making a donation. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.